Welcome to Karma Files, where truth, justice, and karma come full circle. Every story here is a reminder that no matter how dark things get, truth always finds a way to shine. Before we dive in, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what justice means to you. Your thoughts and your voice matter here. Now let's get into today's powerful story.
The fluorescent lights of Riverside High School buzzed with their usual monotonous hum as Lucy Walker entered room 304 that Tuesday morning. Her checkered blazer was pressed perfectly, her natural hair pulled back into an elegant updo, and her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. She'd prepared for this presentation for 3 weeks. English literature with Miss Jennifer Lawrence was supposed to be the highlight of Lucy's junior year. She'd transferred to Riverside from her grandmother's house in rural Georgia just 2 months prior, and despite the culture shock of moving to this affluent suburb, she'd thrown herself into her studies with fierce determination. Literature was her sanctuary. Words were her weapon. But Miss Lawrence had made it clear from day one that not all students were created equal in her classroom. Today, Miss Lawrence announced, her perfectly styled blonde waves catching the morning light as she perched on the edge of her desk, we'll be hearing presentations on the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. Who'd like to go first? Lucy's hand shot up. She'd chosen the green light as her symbol, that beacon of hope and impossible dreams that haunted Jay Gatsby. She understood that yearning, that reaching for something just beyond your grasp. Miss Lawrence's eyes swept over Lucy's raised hand as if it were invisible. Anyone? No volunteers? Her gaze landed on Marcus Chen in the back row. Marcus, why don't you start us off? This was the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Lucy lowered her hand slowly, feeling the familiar burn of being overlooked settle in her chest. Around her, she could feel the other students shifting uncomfortably. Some of them had started to notice the pattern. Marcus stumbled through a presentation about the Valley of Ashes, clearly unprepared. Miss Lawrence smiled indulgently through every fumbled point, offering encouraging nods and helpful prompts. When he finished, she applauded lightly. Wonderful effort, Marcus. You're really developing your analytical skills. She scanned the room again. Next? Lucy raised her hand higher this time, her jaw set with determination. Yes? Miss Lawrence's voice carried a note of resignation, as if she were being imposed upon. Lucy, is it? Go ahead. Lucy walked to the front of the classroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled up her digital presentation on the smartboard and took a deep breath. The green light at the end of Daisy's dock represents... I'm sorry, what was that? I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat it? Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks. The green light at the end of Daisy's dock represents... Slower, please. Enunciate. Miss Lawrence's voice had taken on a tone she was beginning to recognize, a mixture of condescension and barely concealed disdain. Some of us are having trouble understanding your accent. The word accent hung in the air like an accusation. A few students snickered. Most looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between Lucy and the teacher. Sarah Mitchell, who sat in the front row, actually gasped softly. Lucy's southern drawl wasn't thick. She'd worked on softening it for years after her mother's death when she first moved to Atlanta. But it was there, in the way she rounded her vowels, in the slight musical lilt of certain words. It was her grandmother's voice, her mother's voice, the voice of home. And Miss Lawrence was mocking it. I said, she spoke more carefully now, forcing each word out with clinical precision. The green light represents the American dream and Gatsby's desire for a future that can never truly exist. Miss Lawrence made a show of considering this. That's a rather simplistic interpretation, don't you think? The green light symbolism is far more complex than just hope and dreams. I'm afraid this presentation shows a lack of deep textual analysis. But that's not what Lucy had said. She'd prepared an entire 12-slide presentation exploring the duality of the symbol, the way it represented both hope and the corruption of the American dream, the distance between desire and reality. She had quotes highlighted, critical essays referenced, historical context about the 1920s that illuminated Fitzgerald's intentions. She tried to continue, actually, if you look at the context of, that's quite enough. Miss Lawrence waved her hand dismissively. You can sit down now. I think we've heard sufficient effort from you today. C-. Next presenter? C-. Lucy stood frozen for a moment, her entire body rigid with humiliation. She'd received straight A's in English since middle school. She'd won regional writing competitions. She'd been published in her school's literary magazine back in Georgia. And she'd just been dismissed with a C- for an accent. As she walked back to her seat, she caught the sympathetic glances from Sarah Mitchell and Deshaun Roberts, one of the few other Black students in the class. But she also saw the smirks from Jennifer's favorites, Brittany, Madison, and Kyle, who seemed to feed off their teacher's cruelty like remoras trailing a shark. Lucy sat down and stared at her tablet, fighting the burning sensation behind her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give Miss Lawrence that satisfaction. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Brittany presented a barely coherent analysis of the color symbolism that somehow earned an A-. Madison rambled about the death of morality with no textual evidence and received a B+. Kyle read directly from SparkNotes and got an enthusiastic great work. When the bell finally rang, Lucy gathered her things quickly, desperate to escape. But Miss Lawrence's voice stopped her at the door. Lucy? A moment, please. Lucy turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. The classroom had emptied except for the two of them. Miss Lawrence was organizing papers on her desk, not even looking up. I wanted to speak with you about your participation in this class. Now she looked up, and her smile was as cold as winter frost. I've noticed you seem to struggle with the material. Perhaps honors English isn't the right fit for you. There are other, more appropriate classes that might be better suited to your background.
Background? The word was a blade wrapped in silk. My background? Lucy's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. I had a 98 average in my previous school, Ms. Lawrence. I've read every book on this syllabus and written at your previous school. Well, Riverside has higher standards. I'm simply trying to help you avoid future embarrassment. When you speak, it's difficult for others to take you seriously. That accent makes you sound, well, uneducated. And in a college prep environment, that's going to hold you back. The words hit Lucy like physical blows. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. I've worked with many students from
diverse backgrounds over the years. Sometimes they simply don't have the cultural foundations necessary for advanced literary analysis. It's not your fault. It's just a reality we need to acknowledge. Lucy's vision blurred at the edges. This wasn't just criticism. This was systematic, deliberate cruelty disguised as academic concern. This was racism, dressed up in professional language, delivered with a smile that never reached the eyes. "Is there anything else, Ms. Lawrence?" Lucy's voice came out flat, emotionless. "That's all. Just think about what I said, for your own good." The teacher turned back to her computer, dismissing Lucy as if she were an inconvenience finally dealt with. Lucy walked out of room 304 and made it exactly 20 feet down the hallway before she had to stop. She pressed her back against a locker, closed her eyes, and took 3 deep breaths. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, someone was laughing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandmother in Georgia. "How's school, baby girl? Making us proud." Lucy stared at the message. Her grandmother had worked 2 jobs to help raise her after her mother died. She'd sacrificed everything to give Lucy opportunities, to help her get into this prestigious school district when her father got transferred for work. She'd told Lucy stories about her own education in the Jim Crow South, about teachers who wouldn't let her use the good textbooks, about being told she wasn't smart enough, good enough, worthy enough. "We've come so far," she would say. "The doors are open now, baby. You just gotta walk through them." But what happened when you walked through those doors and found the same old hatred waiting inside, just wearing a nicer mask? Lucy deleted 3 attempts at a response before finally typing, "It's fine, Grandma. Learning a lot." She hit send and started walking toward her next class, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She didn't know it yet, but something had crystallized in that moment of humiliation. Something hard and clear and unbreakable. Miss Jennifer Lawrence had made a critical mistake that morning. She had assumed that silencing Lucy's voice meant breaking her spirit. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Over the next 2 weeks, the treatment intensified. Miss Lawrence had a gift for cruelty that was almost artistic in its subtlety. She never said anything overtly racist, never used slurs or obvious discrimination. Instead, she wielded 1,000 tiny cuts, each one small enough to be dismissed, but together they created a pattern impossible to ignore. When Lucy answered questions in class, Miss Lawrence would pause before responding, her face arranged in an expression of strained patience, as if translating from a foreign language. She began asking Lucy to repeat herself even when others had clearly understood her. "I'm sorry, what?" The rest of the class shouldn't have to struggle to understand. "Speak clearly, please." She started calling on Lucy exclusively for the simplest questions, yes or no answers, basic plot points, while reserving the complex analytical discussions for other students. It was a form of intellectual segregation, keeping Lucy confined to the shallow end while everyone else swam in deeper waters. The homework grades were even more suspicious. Lucy would submit essays that were meticulously researched and thoughtfully written, only to receive them back with red ink bleeding across every page. The comments were vague but damning. "Lacks sophistication," "unsupported claims," "questionable analysis." Meanwhile,
Brittany turned in a paper that argued Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye was basically just being dramatic and received an A. But the worst part wasn't Miss Lawrence. It was watching the other students begin to internalize her bias. Some of Lucy's classmates started to echo the teacher's condescension. In group discussions, they would talk over her, dismiss her ideas, or wait for Miss Lawrence's approval before acknowledging any point Lucy made. It was as if the teacher's validation had become the currency of credibility, and Lucy had been declared bankrupt. Kyle had started openly mimicking her accent when she spoke, drawing out his vowels in an exaggerated drawl. "Well, I do declare," he'd muttered to Madison, who would collapse in giggles. Miss Lawrence, of course, never heard these comments, or pretended not to. Lucy's grades in the class had plummeted from an A to a C-. Her confidence, once unshakable, had begun to crack. She found herself second-guessing every word before she spoke, rehearsing sentences in her head, trying to flatten her accent into something more acceptable. One night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, practicing her presentation for the next day's class. She was analyzing Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and she'd been looking forward to this assignment for weeks. But now, as she listened to herself speak, all she could hear was what Miss Lawrence would hear, what she'd criticize, what she'd mock. The novel explores Janie's journey toward self-actualization through 3 marriages that represent different aspects of her relationship with autonomy and... She stopped abruptly. Was she pronouncing marriage too slowly? Did journey sound too rural? Was her voice too quiet, too assertive, too something? She was erasing herself, word by word. Her father knocked on the bathroom door. "Lucy, you okay in there?" She opened the door. David Walker stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes, concern etched across his face. He'd been so proud when they moved here, so excited about the opportunities this school district would provide. He'd grown up poor in Alabama, worked his way through state college, and built a career as a software engineer through sheer determination. This move to Connecticut was supposed to be the culmination of everything he'd worked for, proof that the American dream was real, that hard work paid off, that his daughter could have everything he never did. Lucy couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. "I'm fine, Dad, just practicing for English class." He smiled. "That's my girl. How's that going, by the way? You haven't talked about it much lately." "It's fine." The lie tasted bitter. "Just a lot of work." His father nodded, satisfied. "That's good. That's what you want in an honors class, to be challenged. Your grandmother called today, asked about you, said you seemed stressed when you talked last." Of course she had. Her grandmother could read worry in a text message. "I'm okay," Lucy insisted, "just adjusting." After her father went to bed, Lucy sat at her desk and pulled up her recent essays in Miss Lawrence's class. She'd saved every version, every draft, every comment. She opened a parallel document, essays from her previous school, with comments from Mrs. Davis, her old English teacher. The contrast was staggering. Mrs. Davis's notes were specific and constructive. Consider exploring how the author's biography influences this passage. Excellent analysis. Can you deepen this by examining the historical context? Miss Lawrence's comments were vague and dismissive. Unclear argument. Needs work. Missing the point. But that's what caught Lucy's attention. She noticed something else. Several of her classmates, particularly Brittany and Madison, had been submitting essays that bore striking similarities to sample papers she'd found online. Not quite plagiarism, but close.
They were using sophisticated sentence structures and advanced vocabulary that never appeared in their class discussions. They were citing sources they clearly hadn't read, regurgitating critical interpretations they didn't understand, and Miss Lawrence was praising them. Meanwhile, Lucy's original analysis, work that she'd crafted word by word, idea by idea, was being marked down for being too simple or not scholarly enough. The double standard was obvious. The question was, what to do about it? Lucy pulled out her tablet and started typing. Not an essay this time, something else. She worked until 2 a.m., her eyes burning, her mind racing with possibilities. If Miss Lawrence wanted to play games, Lucy would play, but she'd play to win. The next morning, Lucy arrived at school early. She found Sarah Mitchell at her locker, gathering books for first period. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Sarah turned, her expression immediately sympathetic. She'd been one of the few students who seemed uncomfortable with Miss Lawrence's treatment of Lucy. "Of course. What's up?" "Do you think Miss Lawrence grades fairly?" Sarah's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, discomfort, guilt. I mean, she's tough, but she's tougher on some students than others." There was a long pause. Finally, Sarah sighed. "Yeah, I've noticed. I'm sorry, Lucy. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how, and I was worried about my own grades, which is a terrible excuse, I know." "Don't apologize." Lucy's voice was firm. "I'm not asking you to confront her. I'm asking you if you'd be willing to do something else, something that might actually make a difference." Sarah's eyes narrowed with interest. "I'm listening." Lucy spent the next 15 minutes laying out her plan. By the time she finished, Sarah was nodding slowly, a small smile playing at her lips. "That's brilliant. And honestly, I'm tired of watching her get away with this. She did something similar last year to Miguel Ramirez, kept telling him his English needed work, even though he was born in New Jersey and speaks better than half the class. He ended up dropping to regular English."
Will you help? Absolutely. Over the next few days, Lucy quietly recruited others. Deshaun was immediately on board, having experienced his own subtle discrimination from Miss Lawrence. Emma Park, the class overachiever, agreed after Lucy showed her the grading inconsistencies. Even Marcus Chen, who'd been initially reluctant to get involved, came around after witnessing Miss Lawrence mock Lucy's pronunciation of imagery for a full 2 minutes while the class sat in uncomfortable silence. "The way she looks at you sometimes," Marcus said quietly, "it's not right. My parents always told me to keep my head down, not make waves. But this isn't making waves. This is standing up for what's fair." Lucy's plan was simple, but would require perfect execution. She needed evidence, documentation, multiple witnesses. She needed to create a situation so clear, so undeniable, that even the administration couldn't ignore it. But more than that, she needed to make Miss Lawrence reveal her true self in a way that left no excuses or alternative interpretations. It took 2 more weeks of careful preparation. 2 more weeks of enduring Miss Lawrence's condescension, her casual cruelty, her systematic attempts to make Lucy feel less than. 2 more weeks of watching her grades suffer, of being talked over in class, of being treated like she didn't belong. But Lucy used every slight, every unfair grade, every mocking comment as fuel. She documented everything meticulously: dates, times, exact quotes. She compared her work against other students' assignments. She recorded her presentations on her phone's voice recorder to prove her accent wasn't incomprehensible. And she waited for the perfect moment. It came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Miss Lawrence announced that they'd be presenting their major semester projects, a comprehensive analysis of a novel of their choosing, integrating literary criticism, historical context, and original interpretation. The project was worth 30% of their grade. Lucy had chosen Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. The choice wasn't accidental. The novel was about invisibility, not literal invisibility, but the experience of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as if you didn't exist. The experience of having your humanity denied by people who looked right through you or saw only what they wanted to see. Lucy had lived that novel every day in Miss Lawrence's classroom. The morning of the presentations, Sarah arrived early and set up her laptop at the back of the room. She angled it so it had a clear view of the front of the classroom, of Miss Lawrence's desk, of the presentation area, of everything. "Recording for my own notes," she told Miss Lawrence brightly when asked. "I want to review the presentations later for study purposes." Miss Lawrence, who adored Sarah's consistent A's and appropriately deferential manner, nodded approval. Lucy was scheduled to present last. She sat through 5 other presentations, her heart hammering steadily against her ribs. Brittany presented on Pride and Prejudice with an analysis so superficial it barely scratched the surface. Yet Miss Lawrence called it delightful. Kyle's presentation on The Old Man and the Sea consisted mostly of plot summary, earning him a well done. Finally, it was Lucy's turn. She walked to the front of the room with her tablet, connected it to the smartboard, and took a breath. Her presentation was 30 slides. She'd spent 50 hours on it. She'd read 7 books of literary criticism, examined historical documents from the 1950s, analyzed Ellison's own essays and interviews. It was the best work she'd ever produced. My presentation today explores the concept of invisibility in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Specifically, how the protagonist's invisibility isn't a physical condition, but a social one, a reflection of how society refuses to see Black humanity. She got exactly 4 slides in before Miss Lawrence interrupted. "I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding you. Could you slow down and speak more clearly? You're mumbling." Lucy hadn't been mumbling. Every student in the class knew it. But she complied, enunciating with exaggerated care, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation. She continued, 2 more slides. "Actually, hold on." Miss Lawrence stood up from her desk. "I think we need to address something. Your analysis here is quite derivative. These are not original ideas." "They are," Lucy said quietly. "I can show you my research notes. And I've read Ellison criticism extensively, which is fascinating since she pronounced his name wrong. And this feels like you're just regurgitating other critics without real understanding. Tell me, in your own words, without reading from your notes, what is the novel actually about?" It was a trap, a way to catch Lucy off guard, to make her fumble, to prove Miss Lawrence's point that she didn't really understand the material. But Lucy knew this book. She'd read it 6 times. She'd written her own essays about it before she'd even started her research. She knew it in her bones. Invisible Man is about the cost of being seen only as a symbol or a stereotype rather than as a fully realized human being. It's about a man trying to find his identity in a society that insists he be anything except himself. It's about the violence, physical, psychological, and spiritual, of being rendered invisible by people who can't or won't see your humanity. She paused, and in that pause, the double meaning hung in the air like smoke. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Deshawn was staring at Miss Lawrence with undisguised contempt. And it's about how that invisibility isn't passive. It's actively created and maintained by people in positions of power who benefit from not seeing certain people clearly.
The silence that followed was electric. Miss Lawrence's face had gone red. "That's quite enough. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You are inserting modern political agendas into classic literature instead of engaging with the actual text. This is inappropriate and don't interrupt me." Miss Lawrence's voice had risen. The professional veneer was cracking. "This is exactly your problem, Lucy. You come into my classroom with this attitude, this chip on your shoulder, and you expect special treatment. You expect me to praise work that's simply not up to standard because you want to cry discrimination every time you get constructive feedback." The classroom was dead silent. Several students had their phones out, recording. I saw Sarah adjust her laptop slightly to make sure it was capturing everything. "I haven't mentioned discrimination. I've just presented my analysis of the novel."
Your presentation shows a fundamental misunderstanding of literary analysis, Miss Lawrence snapped. "You're so focused on seeing racism everywhere that you can't engage with literature on its actual artistic merits. Maybe if you spent less time playing the victim and more time actually learning, you'd do better in this class." There it was. The mask had finally slipped. Emma Park's sharp intake of breath was audible. Marcus whispered, "Oh my God." Even Brittany looked uncomfortable. "I'm going to stop you right there," came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Dr. Patricia Chen, the department chair, and one of the school's 2 vice principals stood in the entrance to room 304. Behind her was Mr. James Foster, another English teacher known for his fairness and respect for students. Lucy hadn't known they would be there, but Sarah, Emma, Deshawn, and several other students had. Dr. Chen stepped into the room, her expression unreadable. "Miss Lawrence, I think you should step outside with me. Now, Mr. Foster will supervise the class." Miss Lawrence's face went from red to white. "I was just providing academic feedback. Outside, now." As Miss Lawrence walked past Lucy toward the door, their eyes met for just a second. In that moment, Lucy saw something she'd never seen before in her teacher's face: fear. The door closed behind them. The hallway voices were muffled, but clearly heated. Mr. Foster stepped to the front of the room. He was an older black man with gray at his temples and kind eyes that had seen this story play out too many times before. "Lucy," he said gently, "would you like to continue your presentation?" Lucy looked around the room. Her classmates were staring at her with a mixture of respect, sympathy, and something else: recognition. They'd witnessed it. They'd heard it. There was no more pretending, no more looking away. "Yes," she said, "I would." For the next 20 minutes, Lucy presented her analysis of Invisible Man without interruption. She spoke about Ellison's critique of both racism and the various ideologies that claimed to solve racism while still treating Black people as abstractions rather than individuals. She discussed the novel's exploration of identity, the underground man's journey, the grotesque humor that masked rage, the final recognition that true visibility required claiming one's own narrative. When she finished, the classroom erupted in applause. Not polite applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause. Sarah was beaming. Deshawn was on his feet. Even students who'd never spoken to her before were nodding with respect. Mr. Foster walked to the front. "That was exceptional, Lucy. Truly exceptional. One of the best student presentations on Ellison I've ever witnessed." He paused. "I'm going to grade this personally, and I'll make sure the grade is submitted to your record. I suspect it will impact your overall average significantly." He meant it would raise her grade, would correct the damage Miss Lawrence had done. The bell rang. As students filed out, several stopped to tell Lucy they were sorry, that they should have spoken up sooner, that her presentation was amazing. But Lucy stayed seated, suddenly exhausted.
The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her hollow. Sarah sat down in the desk next to her. "You did it. You actually did it." "Did what?" Lucy asked quietly. "Got my teacher in trouble. That doesn't fix anything." "Maybe not everything, but it's a start. And Lucy, that presentation was incredible. Like, genuinely incredible. I learned more about that book in 20 minutes than I learned about the entire unit on it last year." Emma appeared at Lucy's other side. "I sent the recording to Dr. Chen, along with recordings from the past 3 weeks and screenshots of the grade comparisons you showed me, just so you know." Lucy nodded slowly. This was bigger than one confrontation now. This was documentation, evidence, the case that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. What happens now? Emma and Sarah exchanged glances. "Now," Emma said, "we wait and see if this school actually believes in the things it says it stands for."
The investigation took 3 days. During that time, Ms. Lawrence was placed on administrative leave, and Mr. Foster took over the English literature class. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Students who'd been silent suddenly participated enthusiastically. Discussions became actual discussions rather than one-way lectures. Work was graded fairly, with specific feedback that helped students improve. Lucy learned later what had unfolded behind closed doors. Dr. Chen had reviewed all the evidence, the recordings, the grade comparisons, the documented pattern of behavior. She'd interviewed students, including several who came forward with their own stories of Ms. Lawrence's bias. It wasn't just Lucy. Over her 5 years at Riverside, Ms. Lawrence had systematically targeted students of color, students with accents, students who didn't fit her narrow definition of deserving. Miguel Ramirez, who dropped irregular English the year before, came back to give testimony. So did Keisha Thompson, who'd been in Ms. Lawrence's class 2 years ago and had similar experiences. A pattern emerged that was impossible to deny. But the school administration faced a difficult situation. Ms. Lawrence had tenure. She'd won a teaching award 3 years ago. She had parents in the PTA who loved her, who vouched for her, who couldn't imagine she was anything but the warm, enthusiastic teacher who praised their children and gave them good grades. The parents of those students, the Brittany's and Kyle's of the world, were already organizing. They'd started a petition to support Ms. Lawrence and protect her from false allegations. They argued that she was being unfairly targeted for having high standards, that woke culture was destroying education, that Lucy was just a troubled student who couldn't handle criticism. It was the oldest playbook in the world. Attack the credibility of those who speak up. Lucy's father was furious when he learned what had been happening. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, pacing their living room while Lucy sat curled on the couch. "We could have addressed this months ago." "Because you were so happy about this move," she said quietly. "Because you believed we'd left all of this behind, and I didn't want to be the one to tell you that we hadn't." David Walker stopped pacing. He looked at his daughter, this brilliant, resilient young woman who'd been protecting him from a truth he should have seen himself, and his eyes filled with tears. "Baby girl, that's not your job. Protecting me from reality isn't your responsibility. I am the parent." He sat down next to her. "I should have noticed. I should have asked better questions. I should have—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I wanted so badly to believe that things were different here, better, and I missed what was right in front of me. It's not your fault, Dad. It's not yours either, and we're going to make sure everyone knows that." The next school board meeting was standing room only. Lucy didn't want to go. She'd done her part. She'd stood up for herself. She'd gathered evidence. She'd spoken her truth. Wasn't that enough? But her grandmother had other ideas. Loretta Walker drove up from Georgia for the meeting. At 73 years old, she was a force of nature in a church hat and sensible shoes. She'd been a civil rights activist in the 1960s, had marched in Birmingham, had been arrested twice for sitting at segregated lunch counters. She'd spent 50 years as an educator, teaching in underfunded schools, fighting for her students, refusing to accept that any child was less than exceptional. You think I'm going to let some mediocre woman with a teaching degree and a superiority complex make my grandbaby feel small? Baby girl, I didn't survive fire hoses and police dogs so you could sit silent while they try to erase you. The school board meeting room was divided into clear factions. On one side sat Ms. Lawrence's supporters, mostly white parents, some former students, a few colleagues. They carried signs, "We stand with Jennifer," and "Stop cancel culture." On the other side sat a more diverse group, current students, parents of color, teachers who'd witnessed Ms. Lawrence's behavior, community members who'd heard about the case. Their signs read, "Believe students," and "Accountability matters." Lucy sat with her father and grandmother, Sarah and her mother, Emma and both her parents, Deshaun and his family. Mr. Foster was there too, along with several other teachers who'd quietly supported the investigation. The board chair called the meeting to order. The agenda included many items, but everyone knew why the room was packed. During public comment, Ms. Lawrence's supporters spoke first. They painted her as a dedicated teacher being destroyed by one student's false allegations. They questioned Lucy's character, her grades at her previous school, her motives. One parent, Brittany's mother, suggested that Lucy had fabricated the recordings and manipulated other students into supporting her story. It was brutal to listen to. Lucy kept her face neutral, but she felt her grandmother's hand squeeze her under the table. Then, Dr. Chen presented the administration's findings. She was methodical, clinical, devastating. She showed grade comparisons that revealed clear bias. She played excerpts from recordings that captured Ms. Lawrence's condescending tone, her dismissive comments, her explicit statement about Lucy playing the victim. She presented testimony from 6 students across 3 years, all describing similar experiences. She cited specific district policies on discrimination and hostile educational environments that Ms. Lawrence had violated. This isn't about one incident, Dr. Chen concluded. This is about a pattern of behavior that has harmed multiple students and violated our district's commitment to inclusive education. The evidence is overwhelming and cannot be ignored. Then came the student testimony. Sarah spoke first, describing what she'd witnessed, how uncomfortable it had made her, and how she regretted not speaking up sooner. She admitted that she was scared of losing her A, which is a terrible reason to stay silent when someone is being hurt. Lucy showed more courage in 2 weeks than I showed in 2 months. She deserves better from this school. Emma presented her analysis of grade distributions, showing statistically significant disparities in how Ms. Lawrence graded students of color versus white students with comparable work. The data doesn't lie, and neither do the students.
Deshaun talked about his own experiences, about feeling invisible in class, about watching Ms. Lawrence systematically undermine Lucy. I thought maybe I was imagining it at first, but you can't imagine something that happens every single day, that follows the same pattern, that makes you feel the exact same way every time. That's not imagination, that's reality. Miguel Ramirez, the student from the previous year, spoke via video conference from his new school. "I thought it was my fault," he said. "I thought if I just worked harder, spoke better, was different somehow, she'd treat me fairly. But that's not how it works. The problem was never us. The problem was her." Finally, the board chair asked if Lucy wanted to speak. She hadn't planned to, but looking around the room, seeing the faces of students who'd supported her, seeing her grandmother's encouraging nod, seeing the supporters of Ms. Lawrence who still believed she was lying, She stood up. "My name is Lucy Walker," she began, her voice steady. "And I want to be clear about something. I didn't come to Riverside High School looking for a fight. I came here to learn. I came here excited about being in an honors English class because I love literature. I love words. I love the way stories can help us understand ourselves and each other." She paused, looking directly at the school board members. Ms. Lawrence took that love and turned it into something painful. She made me afraid to speak in class. She made me ashamed of my voice, the voice my mother gave me, the voice my grandmother gave me, the voice that carries my family's history and my home. She made me question whether I belonged in that classroom, whether I was smart enough, whether I deserved to be there. Her voice grew stronger. But here's what she couldn't take from me: the truth. The truth is that my analysis of Invisible Man was excellent. The truth is that my presentations were well-researched and thoughtfully argued. The truth is that I earned A's, not C's. The truth is that my accent doesn't make me uneducated and makes me Southern. And the truth is that Ms. Lawrence didn't fail me academically, she failed me morally. Someone in Ms. Lawrence's section started to protest, but the board chair gestured for silence. I've heard people tonight say this is about one student who can't handle criticism, but that's not what this is about. This is about whether Riverside High School believes in equal treatment regardless of who you are or where you come from. This is about whether you protect all students or just some students. This is about whether you think my dignity matters as much as anyone else's. She looked at the parents holding "We Stand with Jennifer" signs. I understand that many of you have had positive experiences with Ms. Lawrence. I believe that's true. But your truth and my truth can both exist. She can have been a good teacher to your children while being a discriminatory teacher to others. That's how bias works. It's selective. It targets certain people while rewarding others. And just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Now she looked at the students scattered throughout the room, kids she'd never spoken to before but who'd come to support her. I'm not standing here asking you to punish Ms. Lawrence. I'm standing here asking you to protect the next student who walks into her classroom with an accent, or darker skin, or a name that's hard to pronounce. I'm asking you to mean it when you say every student matters. She sat down. The room was silent for a long moment before her grandmother started clapping. Then Sarah. Then Emma. Then Deshawn. Soon half the room was applauding while the other half sat stone-faced. The board chair cleared his throat. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Walker. The board will now move into executive session to discuss this matter. We'll announce our decision within 48 hours. Those 48 hours felt like 48 years. Lucy tried to focus on her other classes, but the weight of waiting pressed down on everything. What if the board sided with Ms. Lawrence? What if they decided the evidence wasn't enough? What if they punished Lucy instead for speaking out? Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support from students she'd never even met. The story had spread beyond Riverside. Local news had picked it up. #JusticeForLucy was trending regionally on social media. But there was backlash, too. Anonymous accounts attacking her online. Messages telling her to go back where she came from. Accusations that she was playing the race card, seeking attention, trying to destroy a good teacher's career. Her father wanted her to stay home from school, but Lucy refused. She said, that's what they want. They want me to disappear, to be quiet, to go away. I'm not giving them that. On Thursday afternoon, 46 hours after the meeting, Dr. Chan called Lucy and her father into her office. The vice principal looked exhausted. I wanted to tell you in person before the announcement goes public, she began. The school board met this morning. They've made their decision. Lucy's heart hammered. Her father gripped her hand. Ms. Jennifer Lawrence has been terminated, effective immediately. The board voted 6-1 in favor of termination based on the evidence of discriminatory conduct and violation of district policies. Dr. Chan's voice was firm but not triumphant. Additionally, the district is implementing mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, establishing a more robust reporting system for discrimination complaints, and creating a student advisory committee to provide input on equity issues. Lucy felt the air leave her lungs. She'd won. Actually won. Furthermore, Dr. Chan continued, the board has authorized me to review all of your grades from Ms. Lawrence's class. Mr. Foster has already reevaluated your work. Your semester grade is being changed from a C- to an A. This will be reflected on your transcript and the original grades will be expunged.
What about the other students? Lucy asked. Miguel and Keisha and... We're conducting a comprehensive review of all students who were in Miss Lawrence's classes over the past 3 years. If grade irregularities are found, they'll be corrected. Miguel Ramirez has already been contacted about having his grades reviewed. David Walker's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for believing her. Dr. Chen's expression softened. I should thank Lucy. She had the courage to speak up and the intelligence to document everything. Without her, this pattern might have continued for years. She looked directly at Lucy. What you did was remarkable, and I'm sorry you had to do it at all. The news broke that evening. Miss Jennifer Lawrence had been fired. Local news covered the story. The statement from the school board was clear. Discrimination would not be tolerated, and all students deserved a learning environment free from bias and harassment. The reaction was predictable. Some celebrated, others fumed. Miss Lawrence's supporters claimed she was being scapegoated. Education forums debated whether students had too much power. Conservative media outlets picked up the story as an example of woke culture run amok. But for Lucy, the most meaningful reaction came from unexpected places. Teachers from across the district reached out to thank her for her courage. Parents of students of color contacted her to share their own stories, their own experiences with settled discrimination that had gone unreported because they didn't think anyone would believe them. Current students at Riverside started speaking up about other issues. Sexist comments from a math teacher, homophobic remarks from a coach, ableist attitudes from a counselor. Lucy's case had opened a door, had shown that speaking up could actually lead to change. But perhaps the most surprising was the letter that arrived at her house 3 days after the board's decision. It was from Brittany. Dear Lucy, I don't know if you'll read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away immediately, but I wanted to say something I should have said months ago. I'm sorry. I was a coward. I knew Miss Lawrence treated you unfairly, and I said nothing. Worse, I laughed along with Kyle's jokes. I benefited from the system that hurt you. I got good grades while you got bad grades, even though your work was better than mine. I know it was. I read your essays when they were cast back. They were incredible. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I told myself maybe you were just too sensitive, or maybe Miss Lawrence's criticism was legitimate, or maybe I was imagining the difference in how she treated us. But I wasn't imagining it. I was just too comfortable to admit what I was seeing. I'm not writing this for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I'm writing this because you deserve to know that you changed something. You made me see my own complicity in racism. You made me understand that staying silent isn't neutral. It's taking a side. My mom was one of the people holding those "We Stand with Jennifer" signs at the board meeting. We had a huge fight about it afterward. She said I was being brainwashed by woke ideology. I told her I was being educated by basic human decency. We're not really speaking right now. But I don't regret it, because you were right about all of it, and I should have stood with you from the beginning. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know that your courage mattered. It changed me, and I think it's changing other people too. I'm sorry, and thank you. Brittany. Lucy read the letter 3 times. She didn't know how to feel about it.
An apology couldn't undo months of humiliation and isolation. It couldn't erase the damage that had been done. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a recognition that change was possible even in people who'd seemed lost to ignorance and complicity. She showed it to her grandmother, who read it carefully and then nodded slowly. "What do you think?" Lucy asked. "I think," Grandma Loretta said thoughtfully, "that you planted a seed, baby girl. You may not see all the fruit it bears, but it's growing. That letter, that's fruit. That girl is thinking differently now. That's how change happens. One person, one moment, one choice at a time." On Monday, Lucy walked into English literature class, now permanently taught by Mr. Foster, and something was different. Students were already deep in discussion about their weekend reading of James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. Deshawn was making a point about Baldwin's use of prophetic voice. Emma was connecting it to contemporary social movements. Sarah was asking questions about historical context. And when Lucy joined the conversation, analyzing Baldwin's relationship with his nephew as a framework for understanding the letter's urgency, everyone listened. Not because they felt guilty, not because they were overcompensating, but because she was making a good point, because her analysis was insightful, because she belonged in this conversation as much as anyone else. Mr. Foster nodded approvingly. "Excellent observation, Lucy. That generational tension is central to the text's power. Let's explore that further." It was such a small moment, such an ordinary moment, exactly the kind of moment that should have been happening all along. And that's when Lucy realized this was what justice looked like. Not revenge, not destruction, not punishment for its own sake. Justice looked like being able to participate in class without fear. Justice looked like fair grades for good work. Justice looked like teachers who saw students as individuals rather than stereotypes. Justice looked like a classroom where everyone's voice mattered. It looked like the ordinary respect that should have been hers from the beginning. 3 weeks later, Lucy received an email from an unexpected source, the Riverside Community Foundation. They'd heard about her case and wanted to offer her their annual Student Leadership Scholarship, a full-ride scholarship to any college in the state, renewable for 4 years. The scholarship was designed for students who'd shown exceptional courage in standing up for equity and justice.
Your actions embody exactly what this scholarship was created to honor, the letter read. You faced injustice, documented it thoroughly, spoke truth to power, and created lasting change in your community. We would be honored if you would accept this award. Lucy stared at the email for a long time. Full ride, any college, 4 years. Her father would cry when she told him. Her grandmother would probably cry harder. But what struck her most was the final paragraph. We hope you'll use your voice and your talents to continue fighting for justice wherever your path leads. The world needs more people like you. The world needs more people like you. Not in spite of her accent, not in spite of where she came from, not in spite of being Southern, being Black, being the granddaughter of civil rights activists, and the daughter of a man who'd climbed out of poverty through education. But because of all those things, because of who she was, completely and unapologetically. The last day of the semester, Mr. Foster asked Lucy to stay after class. I wanted to give you something, he said, pulling a book from his desk drawer. It was a first edition of Invisible Man, signed by Ralph Ellison himself. Mr. Foster, I can't. That must be worth... I want you to have it. His voice was gentle but firm. When I was your age, a teacher tried to tell me I'd never amount to anything because of where I came from, how I spoke, what I looked like. Another teacher, Mrs. Washington, gave me a copy of this book and told me that my voice mattered, that my story mattered, that I mattered. He placed the book in Lucy's hands. That book changed my life. It helped me understand that invisibility isn't something that happens to you. It's something that's done to you by people who refuse to see, and it can be fought by refusing to disappear, by insisting on your own visibility, by telling your own story in your own voice. Lucy opened the book carefully. On the title page, in faded ink, was Ellison's signature. Below it, in fresher ink, Mr. Foster had written, "For Lucy Walker, whose voice cannot be silenced, may you always speak your truth." "Thank you," Lucy whispered. "No," Mr. Foster said. "Thank you. You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. You reminded all of us what courage looks like." That night, Lucy sat at her desk with the signed first edition of Invisible Man in front of her and opened her laptop. She'd been thinking about what came next, about how to use her voice now that she'd found it again. She started a blog. The first post was titled, "On Being Invisible: One Student's Fight Against Discrimination in an Excellent School District." She wrote about her experience, not to shame Miss Lawrence, not to seek revenge, but to document what had happened in a way that might help others. She wrote about the subtle forms of discrimination that were easy to dismiss individually, but devastating cumulatively. She wrote about the importance of documentation, of finding allies, of speaking up even when your voice shakes. She wrote about what justice looked like and what it didn't look like, how it wasn't about destroying someone, but about protecting everyone, how it required courage, but also strategy, emotion, but also evidence, anger, but also hope. Within a week, the post had been shared thousands of times. Students from across the country reached out, sharing their own stories, asking for advice, expressing gratitude that someone had put words to their experiences. Teachers reached out too, good teachers, teachers who wanted to do better, teachers who asked how they could ensure they weren't perpetuating the same patterns Miss Lawrence had. And slowly, piece by piece, Lucy began to understand the full impact of what she'd done. She hadn't just won her own case, she'd created a blueprint. She'd shown other students that documentation mattered, that speaking up was possible, that change was achievable even when the system seemed designed to protect those in power. She'd proven that one voice, Southern accent and all, could challenge injustice and win.
1 year later, Lucy stood at the podium in Riverside High School's auditorium, looking out at an audience of students, teachers, parents, and community members. She'd been invited to speak at the school's first annual Equity and Inclusion Symposium, an event that existed because of her. "A year ago," she began, "I walked into an English classroom excited to learn, and left that same classroom feeling invisible, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because someone in a position of power decided my voice didn't matter." She paused, looking around the room. Miss Lawrence was gone. She'd moved to another state, her teaching career effectively over. But the systems that had enabled her were still here, still needed work, still required vigilance. What I learned that year is that invisibility isn't permanent. It's not a condition. It's a choice that other people make about you, and you can refuse to accept that choice. You can insist on being seen. You can demand to be heard. You can document. You can gather evidence. You can find allies. You can speak truth even when it's terrifying. In the front row, her grandmother smiled. Next to her, Sarah, Emma, and Deshawn nodded in recognition. But here's what else I learned. You don't have to fight alone. Justice isn't an individual achievement. It's a collective effort. It requires people to stand together, to speak up for each other, to recognize that an injustice against one person is a threat to everyone's dignity. She looked directly at the new freshmen in the audience, kids who were just starting their journey at Riverside. If you're sitting in a classroom right now where someone is being treated unfairly, you have choices. You can look away. You can tell yourself it's not your problem. You can stay comfortable. Or you can do what Sarah and Emma and Deshawn did. You can witness. You can document. You can stand with the person being targeted. You can use whatever privilege you have to amplify their voice. Her voice grew stronger. Because here's the truth. The next student who needs help might be you. And when that moment comes, you'll want someone to stand with you. You'll want a community that believes in justice more than convenience. You'll want people who understand that everyone, regardless of accent, color, background, or identity, deserves respect. She closed her notes and spoke from her heart. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be the person who had to fight this fight, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. I'm grateful for the people who stood with me, and I'm grateful to know that my voice, this voice, with its Southern drawl and its history and its refusal to be diminished, matters. The applause started before she finished. It grew louder as she stepped away from the podium, waves of sound that filled the auditorium. But Lucy wasn't focused on the applause. She was looking at a young Latina girl in the third row who'd been crying quietly. As their eyes met, the girl mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." That's when Lucy understood this wasn't just her story anymore. It was a template, a possibility, a proof that justice wasn't just a concept in books or a promise in mission statements. It was achievable. Difficult, yes, requiring courage and sacrifice, and uncomfortable moments, yes, but achievable. And that made all the difference. Later that evening, Lucy sat with her father and grandmother on their back porch, watching the sun set over their Connecticut suburb that had never quite felt like home until recently. You know what's funny? Lucy said thoughtfully. Miss Lawrence tried to silence me because of my voice. But in trying to silence me, she made my voice louder and clearer than it ever would have been otherwise. Grandma Loretta chuckled. That's what they never understand, baby. You can't suppress the truth without eventually exposing yourself. She thought she had the power, but real power doesn't come from silencing others. It comes from speaking your truth so clearly that silence becomes impossible. Mrs. Washington told me the same thing. David Walker added, referencing his own mother. She used to say, they can take everything from you except your voice, and if they try to take that, you holler twice as loud. Lucy smiled. 3 generations of Black Americans, each one fighting different versions of the same battle, each one refusing to disappear. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a student she didn't know, from a school she'd never heard of, thanking her for sharing her story, asking for advice, drawing strength from knowing they weren't alone. Lucy replied, "Document everything. Find your allies. Speak your truth. And remember, your voice matters exactly as it is. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She hit send and looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear, at the world that was still imperfect, but a little more just than it had been a year ago. Miss Jennifer Lawrence tried to make Lucy Walker invisible. Instead, she made her unforgettable. And that, in the end, was the most shocking thing of all. The teacher who mocked a student's accent didn't just lose her job. She lost her power. She lost her platform. She lost the ability to hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt Lucy. While Lucy gained something she'd almost lost, the absolute certainty that her voice, Southern accent, fierce intelligence, unshakable dignity, and all was exactly what the world needed to hear. The end. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like a young woman standing at a podium,
speaking in the voice they tried to silence, changing the system that tried to break her. Sometimes the most shocking ending isn't dramatic confrontation, it's quiet transformation. One courageous voice inspiring others to speak. One act of standing up, creating ripples that become waves. Lucy Walker was mocked for her accent, but in the end, it was her words that changed everything.
Justice feels good when it's served right, doesn't it? If you felt that, drop a fire in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more real, raw, and redemptive stories. Your engagement keeps this channel alive and pushes these messages to people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching Karma Files, where every story ends the way it should.